We call it the sea cloud. Yeah. So I mean, sort of a recognition of the environment it's in. It's a delicate, salty, briny oyster, but the South Carolina oyster in general has a delicate meat. It's not a big chewy bite. It's just sort of like a very small and thinner generally meat, but delicate, and so kind of cloudy. And like it fit, and we definitely have found that name has stuck out to folks. Back in 2015, Kendra, myself, and our former business partner got together and came up with the thought about Charleston, needing essentially a local oyster to fit the restaurant market, to kind of dovetail with a growing demand around the country for single oysters, almost like the concept of oysters like wine, terroir versus merroir. All of those kinds of things were still sort of just coming to be understood around on the East Coast in particular, especially getting north of Massachusetts and areas they've been doing single oyster mariculture for a long time. So kind of one night sitting around talking, the idea came together that we should put together an oyster farm in Charleston, take advantage of the waters here, the really the delicious salinity of the place, the clean, pristine waters. But the one thing that was lacking in Charleston oysters is the ability to produce a single. In order to get that product, you have to back it up and go to a hatchery where they are spawning oysters and setting them as singles, and then ultimately selling at several millimeters that single oyster, and then it comes into our farm and we raise it from that point on out in the creek in our gear. Getting into this, not only had nobody done it on the regulatory side, very few people had done it on the lending side. We had a lot of difficulty finding the funds to get started. Talked to a bunch of different banks to find somebody who would give us some startup capital. This is a capital intensive business. You have to put a lot of gear in the water. You have to spend about 2 years with product, fuel, boat, cages, all your time, all your rope, all your floats, everything that goes out there. It's all out there for 2 years before you sell anything. So it requires startup capital. We had to put in, of course, some of our own, but ultimately we started off with a bank loan. And then we found, a year on, we needed a little bit more to keep us going, basically, to allow us to scale up. There's always unexpected expenses. Everything costs more than it should. And Climb Fund kind of stepped in at the time. I guess it was LDC, but we were recommended to them through SBDC and knew Cindy, and then we just started conversation with her, and ultimately we were able to come together and make that work. We needed working capital, and if you can go out and you can get a loan to buy a new boat, no problem. You could buy a new truck, no problem. But to pay people to come out and be here on the farm with us, we didn't have that funding. You couldn't just borrow that money from anywhere. There's nothing to secure it. So having that unsecured capital was hard to find, and LDC, or Climb Fund, stepped into that breach at that time. The application process was relatively straightforward and simple. It did not, they were open to a unique business model, something that is not typically seen, something they had no familiarity with, that they kind of took our word for. We showed them other examples of people doing what we were doing and what we were trying to build, but they didn't kind of throw us out and just say this isn't a restaurant, or this isn't something obvious that you're not making widgets, which we've talked about many times over the course of the years. Is we're not making widgets, so it's very hard to predict growth rates and yields and one crop versus another crop. It's farming, so them being willing to take that chance on us was, at that critical time, was really valuable and appreciated. We're in the midst of a pretty dramatic growth phase right now. So you can see Kendra in the background is doing oysters right now. We have a bunch of clams in the cooler. We recently acquired Clamor Dave, Sustainable Gourmet. So he's a guy who was up in McClellanville running clams and wild singles for a long time. 20 plus years, has a lot of great customers that overlap with our customers in town and outside of Charleston. He was looking to retire, and so we worked out an arrangement where we were able to take over his suppliers and his customers and his equipment and kind of help him move on out of the business and into something else. And so now we've expanded from just oysters to oysters and clams, also wild singles, whereas we were only doing the farmed previously. We'll probably be getting into mussels this year, so we're really we're excited to get into a new phase of diversification in our product line and more of a focus on distribution versus just the production, because it can be very difficult to sustain a business when you're only selling what you yourself can grow, when you can kind of bring it together and add value to it and distribute it to preferred partners with relationships that have been built over time and trust that we've been building for years and years. That all works together really well. So we're seeing that coming together now. I think in the next year, that's going to really grow dramatically for us.